Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn, joined by Ben Habib. We were just looking at the Piers Morgan gotcha moment, and you were clarifying what you meant by homegrown to avoid any suggestions that your father, who's a Pakistani Muslim from the depths of Punjab, would be deported himself. And you were clarifying what your policy is.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've pretty much done our policy, but just to be clear, when I said homegrown on the Piers Morgan show, what I meant was homegrown culture, not homegrown DNA. I'm not, when you go down the road of DNA, you end up in all sorts of trouble because no population, particularly the British population, is pure in any sense. No population is, even Japanese population is not pure. But the British population in particular is not pure because we did have an empire. We did go abroad, we did intermarry, and we brought people back and so on. And, you take me, for example. My dad, as you know, as Piers Morgan repeatedly bashed on about, is Pakistani and culturally Muslim, even though he drinks and, or used to drink. He doesn't drink anymore, he's too old. And my mother is English, blonde, blue-eyed, born as Isleworth. Her father fought in the Somme, went to Cambridge, etc. And I was born in Karachi, but I came here at a young age. Went to rugby school, went to Cambridge, worked in the city, and I've lived in this country all my life. Married what looks like an English girl, even though she was no more English than I was. She was half English, a quarter Scottish, and a quarter Russian. And I've got two sons, both of whom are just a half English. One of them's white, one of them's my color, brown. Both of them are half English. Both of them are a quarter Pakistani. Both of them are an eighth Russian and an eighth Scottish. They're a real mix. But they both went to very good English schools, I'm delighted to say, and proud that they did. And they are entirely British to look, feel, touch, and would have no other place in the world to go other than this country. And they love this country and they die for this country. So they're not pure blood. They're not Anglo-Saxon in the traditional sense. But it would be absurd to have a policy in a political party which got rid of my children. And where would my children go? You can't go down the DNA route. The DNA route is a dead end. What you've got to focus on is cultural nationalism, the nation's culture. And that does require making sure the demography doesn't change radically and rapidly. That does require that any demographic change is very, very slow. But we've had massive demographic change at a rate where even without the stupid DEI progressive discrimination that we've got, even without it, we would have been challenged to settle our own culture because of the speed at which we were changing our demography. So this is a very nuanced, very difficult area, I think, for politicians to be able to talk about and express. But it's critical to get the right balance because you want to govern peacefully and you want to get that cultural settlement so that we understand who we are as a people, so that we pull together as a nation, so that we can be prosperous. All these things go hand in hand, but you don't want to go down a route which results effectively, ultimately, potentially in ethnic cleansing. I mean, that's not a good route.
So just to clarify, and so people don't get worried, if you like, about what your views are, and I say, and there has been this difference between you and Rupert in terms of his views, is that turning around, if people turn around and say, well, hang on, if we don't have British values, there's a risk that we could be deported. Is that a fair summary?
If you're foreign and you do the things that I mentioned, like you're marching on the streets against British interests, you're proselytizing, you commit a crime in this country, you will be deported. Absolutely.
And how far back do you go?
Well, anyway, any foreigner. But if you're a British citizen, it's different. I'm not suggesting we strip British citizens of their citizenship. Now, that's the challenge. When you start making decisions to strip, we can strip certain people of citizenship. That is possible. But the bar to strip citizenship has to be very, very high. And the reason for that is no government can really be fully trusted. If you empower government to start stripping people of their citizenship, there's a risk that they will use it with impunity. That's also why, Andrew, granting British citizenship should be something that's very rarely done and very carefully considered before it is done. So that when it is done, you've made sure that the individual who's got the great privilege of becoming a British citizen actually returns the compliment, for want of a better word, by respecting, loving, and caring for this country. Are you with me?
Oh no,
And
I understand. So just so everybody's
yeah.
clear on this, and they're looking at the ballot papers and they see reform and they see restore and they see advance on the paper, and this issue is one of the big burning issues of our time. What is the difference between advances policy, restores policy, and reforms policy?
So I don't think there is a difference between how Rupert Lowe thinks and how I think. I don't think there is. There may be a perception difference of people who look at Restore and think Restore is going to be harder than Advance. But its policies actually, if you look at the paper put out by Restore on mass deportations, for example, it talks about how it could live with the trade and cooperation agreement and the withdrawal agreement, even though we would need to get out of the ECHR to do the mass deportations that Restore wishes to do. Now, an advanced UK government would actually simply terminate the withdrawal agreement and the trade and cooperation agreement, because I don't think you can restore the United Kingdom without doing that. So we're actually tougher on that policy than Restore is. And if you look at Restore's website and you look at what they say on indefinite leave to remain, what it says is that they will remove benefits from people who've got indefinite leave to remain. It doesn't say what Advance says, which is that we will reverse it all the way back to 2019. We're actually tougher in our policies than what I've seen from Restore. But some of the rhetoric from people who are identified as speaking for Restore, because it's not clear who actually does speak for Restore, because there's not a list of people on their website, who are identified as, part of the hierarchy. Some of the people who are identified, broadly with Restore say more aggressive things than I say. But the policies of Restore, when you read what's on the website, are actually in many ways not as radical as our policies.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important, Ben. As you know, I would like to give the opportunity to everybody just to clarify what their views are, rather than just limiting it by just a label. There was that leaked recording, and I always say, look, every time, everything you ever say, every photo you ever have done, will at some stage come back to bite you and get published. There was that leaked recording of you saying that Restore have gone full-blown racist. Put that
Full
into
tilt,
context for me.
full tilt racist. After discussions of a merger kind of broke down, or they never went anywhere. I don't know if you noticed, Andrew, but there was a massive amount of vitriol directed at me from certain members of Restore.
There was horrible racist abuse, with you being called the P word and so on and so forth, which
Yeah,
has no place in any decent society.
yeah. I mean, it was just off the scale. It was off the scale. And there was no denunciation coming of it. And there are people who are apparently spokesmen for Restore, though it's not clear because people aren't listed on their website. I think one thing Rupert Lowe should do is actually put a list of his senior management and people who speak for Restore on his website, so we know who it is that speaks for Restore, rather than trying to guess. We think Connor Tomlinson speaks for Restore. We think Harrison Pitt speaks for Restore, but they're not listed on the website. But there are certain things that these individuals and others have said that is much more DNA orientated and less cultural nationalist orientated. I'm of the latter. A lot of them denounce civic nationalism. They denounce it, and they say Ben's a civnat. I'm not a civnat. I'm not. I'm a cultural nationalist. It's different. A civil nationalist, actually, if you look up the definition, I mean, we're getting into semantics now, but if you look up the definition, believes in the institutions of this country. It's the institutional framework that you believe in, and you think as long as the institutional framework continues to exist and is in control, well, then everything's fine. I don't agree with that. I think our civil institutions have actually been in many ways hijacked, and we need a complete look at how our institutions are working. I'm not a civnat. I'm a cultural nationalist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think this is the problem, isn't it? Because people hide behind these labels and they
Yeah.
turn around and sort of, I say it's easy to dismiss anybody's argument by just saying you're racist or you're far right or whatever it is. What I like is that people can unpack in, get rid of the jargon. Let's jargon bust, unpack in words that everybody understands so they don't have to rush to a dictionary to see what you're actually saying and just to get that clarification. But your comment about going full blown racist was in response to the responses that you were getting and calling you the P word and all sorts of other abuse.
It was off the scale. I hadn't seen anything like it since the late 70s, early 80s, when it was alive and kicking in those days. I thought it had all gone. But my God, I got it in the neck. It doesn't worry me, by the way. It's like water off a duck's back. I couldn't care less.
Well, no,
People can call me whatever.
it offended me and it
Yeah.
offended a number of right-thinking people that we can't have a sensible discussion without people just resorting to abuse. So, and it also, the problem is this, Ben, it detracts from what are very sensible arguments, very sensible issues that need to be addressed. As soon as you start insulting people and then genuinely being racially abusive, you're devaluing the argument, aren't you?
You are. You lose the argument. Abuse never wins an argument. And more often than not, it's used because you've lost the argument.
Absolutely,
You
and
know,
this is what
yeah.
happens, and so often on live television, people get pushed to a point where they're angry and they'll say something. It's like one of the
Well,
speakers
that's
when you
what
want
Piers
that sort of.
Morgan.
Yeah, well,
That's what Piers
the
Morgan.
celebrity squares type thing that he was doing. Remember that program, which was interesting. But you basically, this is what he did, and somebody was saying, "Oh, you dumb bitch" or whatever, and Piers like latched onto that.
But he was
Yes,
trying to. He
in the
was
heat
trying
of
to
the
push
moment,
my
that's what he was
buttons.
saying.
He was trying to push my buttons. He wanted me. He wanted to insult my father so that I'd say something in defense of my father, or get angry and say something out of context. And I said homegrown culture, and he latched on homegrown and tried to make it a DNA issue.
Yeah.
If there was any racism, by the way, in the Piers Morgan interview, it was really coming from Piers because he kept homing in on the race of my father and not on, by the way, my father never lived in this country until recently. He's now 92. He lives with me because he needs full-time care. He lived in Karachi until 2022. He now lives with me because he needs full-time help. My father presents no threat to the United Kingdom. He's not going to be found marching on the streets of London. It's an effort to get him up in the morning, give him his breakfast, and look after him. You know.
I think it's so important, and I will always say that I have people from all political persuasions and so on and so forth. I try not to declare any interest other than to make sure that people can have their views fairly represented. That's what I try and do. Hold their feet to the fire, if you like, question the answers, not just ask those questions, but also to make sure that people are fairly represented. It's not just going for the soundbite.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's what you do so brilliantly, Andrew, if I may say so. And I would hope that your show gets more prominence and is shared more because you do give those who come on your show the ability to speak without being interrupted and to develop their thoughts and to reveal their philosophies and their approach, which so many others don't. I mean, it was like a bun fight, that Piers Morgan thing. It was like I came out of it thinking, have I just been in a boxing ring?
I always say P.T. Barnum, the great showman, always said, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight.
Yes, it's not my way of behaving.
It is good. Ben, I appreciate your time today. We
Well,
will
thank you.
have you back and obviously continue clarifying and also get other views. Your father is indeed, I know Piers put out the invitation. He's very welcome to come on the Andrew Eborn Show.
My father is 92. He needs a break.
Well, David Attenborough is 100, so it's
Yeah,
got,
yeah.
it's got it. But for now, Ben Habib, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Now, I can't recommend Andrew Eborn's show more highly. If you really want to understand how a politician thinks, watch that politician being interviewed by Andrew. Andrew is kind and inviting in the questions that he puts to them. And that's critical because that allows them to develop their thoughts and their views for you, the viewer, to understand. It's not about clickbait. It's not about the gotcha moment. It's about developing the arguments and the beliefs of those who are being interviewed so you, the viewer, can fully understand them. That's the only way political discourse is really going to improve in this country. So, Andrew, thank you for what you do. And if you like what Andrew does, subscribe to his channel.